Hey everyone, it's Dr. Scott. So we're not meeting as a class this week. I'm not that much of a jerk. I'll make you guys come in on the Tuesday of Thanksgiving break. But I wanted to check in with you all because I think if you did the coding last week, maybe figured a few things out, and then you just don't do anything until next week, you're kind of bunching things up towards the end in a way that might be kind of problematic. So I'm going to ask everybody to either email me or meet with me later this week to talk to me about explanatory schema. And I'll have more specifics in the email that I'm going to send you all with the link to this video. So in this video, I want to talk about a few things. I want to talk about coding really quickly. I want to talk about the explanatory schema and kind of next steps. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch the screens here in just a little bit, and I'm going to show you what a few folks in the class have shared with me that might be helpful to you all. So stay tuned. Let me switch up screens. So really quickly about coding, something I wanted to share with you all is the work that JP is doing with his artifact. It's a video game, and I love the way that he's kind of set up his codes here. So he has what's presented. So this is like what is on the screen, what he's able to identify. Like these are kind of like the facts that are present within the artifact that he's analyzing. And then over here on the right, there's what's suggested. You can call this like what's the mini interpretation of that. Internal spite and anger for text font is white on black background when louder. So he has these interpretations of these things that he's observing in the artifact that he's taking a look at. When you're coding, I love this setup because when it comes time for you to sort things into those different groups to develop your explanatory schema, you're sorting them based on this. Separated from society, lack of interest in the world. I mean, there can be you might start seeing that there's piles of things where it's like internal, like him, like something dark about this character's self versus how he relates to people in different circumstances, like when he's interacting with society. So it's this over here that you're sorting to develop your groups. One of the problems we had with the Colin Kaepernick video is that we were trying to sort based over here on what's on the left. So like vibrant colors, or we had that linguistics category. I think that's not what Foss is arguing, and that's my fault for not reminding us of that. We did that the first day we did coding, but we didn't do it the second day we did coding. You're sorting things based on what's over here, what's in the suggested column. So what JP is going to do is he's going to cut these up, and he might do that using technology, using Google Docs here, or he could cut these up and then start sorting them physically, like putting things in different piles. Things that like, is this connected to this? No, maybe they need to be in separate areas. He might say this is connected to this because we're talking about larger society or something like that. So he might put these two in a group. Those groups, when you bring them together, that's your explanatory schema. So I'm going to show you one other technology option for those of you that are thinking about coding and kind of sorting your work and identifying categories to develop that explanatory schema that I'll talk about in just a second. This is Erin's work. She is taking a look at a character in a video game and how people have responded to that character. So she's got these different tabs down here. These are her kind of buckets or categories of codes that she has. She has a lot in the actions category, some in the assumptions, hunter, got looks, we got qualities here. So these, kind of using what JP had, here is what was commented in the discussion board that Erin is analyzing. So this is like what is present. Then here in this column, the meaning, you can think about this in terms of like what is suggested or what's the little interpretation that she would have of that. So I'm not only sure about these categories down here. I want to talk to Erin a little bit about them, but I think, we have like manipulation. Some people think that she as a character is manipulative, that she's pretentious. Then there's also things about the kind of actions that she's done. So this is one way to kind of think about how you can go about coding. And so the way that you would do that is you would kind of just write down all of your, here's what's present in the text, and then go through, here's my interpretation of those things. And then you can start kind of coding them and say, what bucket does that go into? Actions, assumptions, changes. And then that becomes these individual spreadsheets that she has down here. However you go about listing out your codes and then sorting your codes, that's completely up to you. I've given you a couple options here because I think sometimes they can help you kind of visualize and get your head around the data that you're working with in a way that maybe cutting things doesn't work. Cutting things up, that works just fine for me. Excel can also work for me, particularly when I'm working with a lot of data. So if you're working with a pretty, a large set of data, I think using some technology can be pretty helpful. The next step, once you've written down things, you've identified like, yep, that's something that's either frequent or intense that happens in the text, and then you kind of interpret that and say what's suggested by that thing that you notice in the text. Then you go about sorting and coming up with categories that you can sort things into. That's the part where I think folks are sometimes going for like the easy thing, for like linguistic things or something like that. You want to put a little bit of time into that to make sure that you have good categories there. Because ultimately the categories are going to help you develop what's called an explanatory schema, which is the next step for many of you. The explanatory schema needs to have 4 things. And I'm thinking about this because I've overheard conversations amongst folks, and I've heard people say things a little along the lines of, well, this is really subjective, so it doesn't really matter what I do here. And this is where I have to call bullshit. Because FOSS is really clear. Your explanatory schema needs to have 4 things. It needs to be encompassing. It needs to account for the different categories of codes that you have. It's maybe not going to hit every last little code, but it needs to hit all the categories of codes that you identified in your data. It needs to be a reasonable inference. So that explanatory schema needs to be something like you could share that with somebody and they could say, yeah, you know what, that kind of makes some sense. I can see that with the categories, and then those categories need to have a reasonable inference within it as well. Like, yeah, I can understand why you put those different quotes in that category, and then, yeah, I can understand how these different categories are coming together to form that explanatory schema. Schema also needs to be insightful, so that's the third thing that FOSS mentions. It needs to be something that's not obvious. So something that kind of, we learn something about the artifact from understanding your explanatory schema. And it needs to be a good fit or feel for the artifact. So one piece of Owen's project that he's working on is that there's something dark about the lyrics in this song that he's looking at. Like, yeah, so an explanatory schema would need to kind of account for that kind of mysterious darkness. There's something going on there that schema would need to account for. It needs to fit what's going on in the artifact that you're looking at. So you need to have those 4 criteria to have a solid explanatory schema. Once you have that, you recode again and you look for that explanatory schema, and then you kind of put things into categories and you do that process a second time. That second time is going to go a lot quicker, and once you have that, you're going to be able to hit the ground running and start doing some writing. So I'll put this in the email, but if hopefully you've stuck through, hopefully this is helpful to you all. I'll put this in the email, but I would like everybody by the end of Thanksgiving break, so the end of this upcoming weekend, I want you to reach out to me to say, here are the categories. I've done my coding and my sorting. Here are the categories I came up with. Here's my explanatory schema. And I want you to tell me a little bit about how it meets the 4 criteria. You don't need to give me a big case because I want you to put your effort into doing the work right now. But I need to see that you guys are coming up with something that can actually work for your project. If you're stuck, let me know. Reach out, and I'd be happy to chat with you guys over break to make sure that you're on the right path. If you're meeting with me during the week of Thanksgiving break, you do not need to send that email to me. We'll talk about it. But if you're not going to meet with me, I do want you to send me an email by the end of Thanksgiving break. What are your categories? What's your explanatory schema? How do you think you're meeting the 4 criteria? Okay, that's it for now. Bye. Have a good break.